Chapter 7 of Alice Adams. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jeanie. Alice Adams by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 7. They danced. Mr. Dowling should have found other forms of exercise and pastime. Nature has not designed everyone for dancing, though sometimes those she has denied are the last to discover her niggardliness. But the round young man was at least vigorous enough, too much so when his knees collided with Alice's, and he was too sturdy to be thrown off his feet himself, or to allow his partner to fall when he tripped her. He held her up valiantly, and continued to beat a path through the crowd of other dancers by main force. He paid no attention to anything suggested by the efforts of the musicians, and appeared to be unaware that there should have been some connection between what they were doing and what he was doing. But he may have listened to other music of his own, for his expression was of high content. He seemed to feel no doubt whatever that he was dancing. Alice kept as far away from him as, under the circumstances, she could, and when they stopped she glanced down and found the execution of unseen manoeuvres within the protection of her skirt helpful to one of her insteps, and to the toes of both her slippers. Her cheery partner was paddling his rosy brows with a fine handkerchief. "That was great," he said. "Let's go and sit in the corridor. They've got some comfortable chairs out there." "Well, let's not," she returned. "I believe I'd rather stay in here and look at the crowd." "No, that isn't it," he said, chiding her with a waggish forefinger. "You think if you go out there you'll miss a chance of someone else asking you for the next dance, and so you'll have to give it to me. How absurd!" Then, after a look about her that revealed nothing encouraging, she added graciously, "You can have the next if you want it." "Great!" he said, mechanically. "Now let's get out of here. Out of this room, anyhow." "Why? What's the matter with—" "My mother," Mr. Dowling explained. "But don't look at her. She keeps motioning me to come and see after Ella, and I'm simply not going to do it, you see." Alice laughed. "I don't believe it's so much as that," she said, and consented to walk with him to a point in the next room from which Mrs. Dowling's continuous signalling could not be seen. "Your mother hates me." "Oh, no, I wouldn't say that. No, she don't," he protested innocently. "She don't know you more than just to speak to, you see, so how could she?" "Well, she does. I can tell." A frown appeared, too, upon his rounded brow. "No, I'll tell you the way she feels. It's like this. Ella isn't too popular, you know. It's hard to see why, because she's a right nice girl in her way. And Mother thinks I ought to look after her, you see. She thinks I ought to dance a whole lot with her myself and stir up the other fellows to dance with her. It's simply impossible to make Mother understand you can't do that, you see. And then about me, you see, if she had her way I wouldn't get to dance with anyone at all except girls like Mildred Palmer and Henrietta Lamb. My mother wants to run my whole program for me, you understand. But the trouble of it is, about girls like that, you see, well, I couldn't do what she wants, even if I wanted to myself, because you take those girls, and by the time I get Ella off my hands for a minute, why, their dancers are always every last one taken, and where do I come in?" Alice nodded, her amiability undamaged. "I see. So that's why you dance with me." "No, I like to," he protested. "I rather dance with you than I do with those girls." And he added, with a retrospective determination which showed that he had been through quite an experience with Mrs. Dowling in this matter, "I told Mother I would, too." "Did it take all your courage, Frank?" He looked at her shrewdly. "Now you're trying to tease me," he said. "I don't care. I would rather dance with you. In the first place, you're a perfectly beautiful dancer, you see, and in the second, a man feels a lot more comfortable with you than he does with them. Of course, I know almost all the other fellows get along with those girls all right, but I don't waste any time on 'em. I don't have to. I like people that are always cordial to everyone, you see, the way you are." "Thank you," she said, thoughtfully. "Oh, I mean it," he insisted. "There goes the band again. Shall we?" "Suppose we sit it out," she suggested. "I believe I'd like to go out into the corridor, after all. It's pretty warm in here." Assenting cheerfully, Dowling conducted her to a pair of easy-chairs within a secluded grove of box-trees, and when they came to this retreat they found Mildred Palmer just departing, under escort of a well-favoured gentleman about 30. As these two walked slowly away in the direction of the dancing-floor, they left it not to be doubted that they were on excellent terms with each other. Mildred was evidently willing to make their progress even slower, for she halted momentarily, not once, but twice. And her upward glances to her tall companion's face were of a gentle, almost blushing deference. Never before had Alice seen anything like this in her friend's manner. "How queer," she murmured. "What's queer?" Dowling inquired as they sat down. "Who was that man?" "Haven't you met him?" "I never saw him before. Who is he?" "Why, it's Arthur Russell." "What Arthur Russell? I never heard of him." Mr. Dowling was puzzled. "Why, that's funny. Only the last time I saw you, you were telling me how awfully well you knew Mildred Palmer." "Why, certainly I do," Alice informed him. "She's my most intimate friend." "That's what makes it so funny you haven't heard anything about this Russell, because everybody says, even if she isn't engaged to him right now, she most likely will be before very long. I must say it looks a good deal that way to me myself." "What nonsense!" Alice exclaimed. "She's never even mentioned him to me." The young man glanced at her dubiously and passed a finger over the tiny prong that dashingly composed the whole substance of his moustache. "Well, you see, Mildred is pretty reserved," he remarked. "This Russell is some kind of cousin of the Palmer family, I understand." "He is?" "Yes, second or third or something, the girls say. You see, my sister Ella hasn't got much to do at home, and don't read anything, or sew, or play solitaire, you see, and she hears about pretty much everything that goes on, you see. Well, Ella says a lot of the girls have been talking about Mildred and this Arthur Russell for quite a while back, you see. They were all wondering what he was going to look like, you see, because he only got here yesterday, and that proves she must have been talking to some of 'em, or else how—" Alice laughed airily, but the pretty sound ended abruptly with an audible intake of breath. "Of course, while Mildred is my most intimate friend," she said, "I don't mean she tells me everything, and naturally she has other friends besides. What else did your sister say she told them about this Mr. Russell?" "Well, it seems he's very well off. At least Henrietta Lamb told Ella he was. Ella says—" Alice interrupted again with an increased irritability. "Oh, never mind what Ella says. Let's find something better to talk about than Mr. Russell." "Well, I'm willing," Mr. Dowling assented ruefully. "What do you want to talk about?" But this liberal offer found her unresponsive. She sat leaning back, silent, her arms along the arms of her chair, and her eyes, moist and bright, fixed upon a wide doorway where the dancers fluctuated. She was disquieted by more than Mildred's reserve, though reserve so marked had certainly the significance of a warning that Alice's definition, "my most intimate friend," lacked sanction. Indirect notice to this effect could not well have been more emphatic, but the sting of it was left for a later moment. Something else preoccupied Alice. She had just been surprised by an odd experience. At first sight of this Mr. Arthur Russell, she had said to herself instantly, in words as definite as if she spoke them aloud, though they seemed more like words spoken to her by some unknown person within her, "There! That's exactly the kind of looking man I'd like to marry." In the eyes of the restless and the longing, Providence often appears to be worse than inscrutable. An unreliable omnipotence given to haphazard whimsies in dealing with its own creatures, choosing at random some among them to be rent with tragic deprivations, and others to be petted with blessing upon blessing. In Alice's eyes, Mildred had been blessed enough. Something ought to be left over, by this time, for another girl. The final touch to the heaping perfection of Christmas in everything, for Mildred, was that this Mr. Arthur Russell, good-looking, kind-looking, graceful, the perfect fiancé, should be also very well off. Of course, these rich always married one another. And while the Mildreds danced with their Arthur Russells, the best an outsider could do for herself was to sit with Frank Dowling. The one last course left her that was better than dancing with him. "Well, what do you want to talk about?" he inquired. "Nothing," she said. "Suppose we just sit, Frank." But a moment later she remembered something, and with a sudden animation began to prattle. She pointed to the musicians down the corridor. "Oh, look at them! Look at the leader! Aren't they funny? Someone told me they're called Jazz Louie and his half-breed bunch. Isn't that just crazy? Don't you love it? Do watch them, Frank." She continued to chatter, and while thus keeping his glance away from herself, she detached the forlorn bouquet of dead violets from her dress and laid it gently beside the one she had carried. The latter already reposed in the obscurity selected for it at the base of one of the box-trees. Then she was abruptly silent. "You certainly are a funny girl," Dowling remarked. "You say you don't want to talk about anything at all, and then all of a sudden you break out and talk a blue streak, and just about the time I begin to get interested in what you're saying, you shut off. What's the matter with girls, anyhow, when they do things like that?" "I don't know. We're just queer, I guess." "I say so. Well, what'll we do now? Talk or just sit?"